Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to talk about something which has been really scratching at the back of my mind for the last little while, and it's a cross-contamination of genres into comics, which is what seems to be hurting comics, I would say. Possibly not the most, but to a great extent, it's really hurting the storytelling in comics. And what made me start thinking about this is this new series that's going to be coming out soon from Marvel called Meet the Skrulls. And it's basically The Americans, if you remember that show, where they had Russian spies and they were pretending to be Americans and they were just pretending to be suburban white Americans. And this is what you have in Meet the Skrulls. You have these Skrulls. They're spies on Earth. They're pretending to be suburban white middle-class Americans, and you can see this going south from a mile away. But that's not so much what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what happens when the movies start cross-contaminating into the comics. And I think that's what's happening with this book. Again, I don't know much about it except for what Marvel has put out on its website, the interviews with its creators, and some of the art for it. But it really seems to me that with this and a number of things leading up to this over the last couple of years, that there is this cross-contamination of the movies into the comics. Now, the thing is that every genre works on its own when it actually has something of its own to offer. Something that's different than everything else. And that's the only way a genre really can survive. You know, I'm thinking about radio plays. Now, even though Marvel is trying to put out podcasts with radio plays on them about Wolverine, Logan now, it's a dead genre. Why? Because what it had to offer was overtaken by television. The audio and the visual was available there in the television, and so television overtook anything unique that radio plays really had. And you're talking to someone here who really enjoyed radio plays a long time ago. I used to listen to The Shadow and a lot of things like that. I really did enjoy radio plays, but it's a dead genre now, and you can bring it back for nostalgia's sake, but that's about it. But the thing is that, as I said, any kind of genre works on its own when it actually has something of its own to contribute. Now, also, I have to add that a lot of people think that the whole industry of print is just going to die. And they thought that for the last 20 years, that the digital was going to overtake the print and it was just going to kill it. But in the last number of years, people actually want to buy books again. They're getting rid of some of the digital and they're going back to print. And comics, being a part of print, is still a genre that actually has some clout with readers. People want an actual book instead of a digital book. And again, you're talking to someone here. I hate digital. I use it when I have to, but I want something in my hands. There is something about having a piece of art, a story in your hands that existed only in this one point in time and that you were a part of. Now, you can buy the graphic novels and the reprints and all that kind of stuff, but when you buy it off the shelf, you're actually a part of that. You're a part of that one moment in time, and you actually have that in your hand, that story and that art. And I think that's something that tangible, something that you really need in comics. Maybe that's just me. But as I said, I think there's a cross-contamination coming into comics and actually smothering all of its uniqueness. And so that's partly what's killing it right now, because any genre exists because of what unique thing it brings to the table. And if that unique thing that it brings to the table is smothered by something else, then it will die. Now, to look at this from the perspective of movies taking over comics, first I want to look back just quickly at comics trying to translate directly into movies, because a lot of people think that these comic book movies out there today were really the first comic book movies, and I'm here to tell you that as someone who watched comic book movies in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, they've been around for a while. Not a lot of them, but they've been around for a while. Just good comic book movies haven't been around for a while. They started with Blade, and then they started to get good after that. But there were certainly plenty before that. I can remember Spider-Man from the 70s, trying to reboot that I don't know how many times, watching Captain America with his plastic shield and his blue motorcycle, or The Punisher in the 90s and Generation X. Those things were awful. because what they were trying to do is they were trying to take the stories out of the genre of comics and translate them directly onto the screen for the movies. And it just did not work. And it wasn't, I don't think, until, first of all, the special effects actually cut up so you could make it look visually like you had superpowers and not make it look campy, but at the same time to allow the movies to shine, to actually use their genre, to change here and there the comic book story and the comic book visual so that it worked better in the movies. And that's how the movies for comic book movies became great. And so you had to let that uniqueness of the movies shine with the comic book stories. And that's why those comic book stories that they tried to make in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s were just awful, because they were trying to translate them directly. It was trying to overlay one genre onto another, which doesn't work. But today we have the exact opposite. You have the movies, I would say, trying to translate themselves directly onto the comic books. And it's not working. And it's killing comics. And what made me really think about this was not just Meet the Skrulls, but a number of other things, because I was looking at, a lot of the art for Hawkeye when I did my Hawkeye video, because I wanted to give a lot of art in the background. And there was a lot of art on the internet about the modern Hawkeye look and the modern Hawkeye in the movies. And they looked almost exactly the same. And I thought to myself, that's not how Hawkeye looked for the first, 40, 50 years of his existence. Why would they change it now? Well, they change it now because he's reflecting what people see in the movies. Although the character doesn't act like anything in the movies at all, they're trying to make the visual, at the very least, something like the movies. And it's a boring look in a comic book when you have all that spectacular art that you can draw upon and all that visual that you can draw upon. It's just boring to look at him in the same uniform that he has in the movies. I mean, it works in the movies, it works in live action, it doesn't work in the comics. And another one, and I'm not really sure about this one, but, I've read Black Panther books off and on since the 70s. I really never liked it, but I read it off and on. And I don't know if Black Panther, T'Challa's sister, was actually in the comic books before this, Shuri. And the thing is that now you have this character that I really never heard of before actually taking on the mantle of Black Panther. And you have Marvel pushing it on their website saying, hey, look, Shuri is now the new Black Panther. And for me, if I'm correct, that she never actually played a big part in the comics. Well, the thing is that they're taking that character from the movies. They're implanting it into the comics. And again, it does not translate well, certainly not in the way that they're actually putting it in the comics. It's the worst comic ever. I mean, the art is awful. The story is awful. It's just bad. But again, it's the movies trying to translate its material onto the comics right there. And this is happening in a number of ways. But up until this point, it has been the movies do well, and then they take the elements which they think that they can translate from those movies that do well and put them in the comics. Like Guardians of the Galaxy. When Guardians of the Galaxy came out, I was hoping that my old runs of Guardians of the Galaxy were actually going to be worth something. They're not, because they're not the same Guardians of the Galaxy that are in the movies. But the Guardians of the Galaxies in the movies have now been translated into the comics, and they are now the actual Guardians of the Galaxy in the comics. Again, it's the movies informing the comics because the movie did well. But with Meet the Skrulls, and what I am dreading with this, is that what they are doing is they are already taking what they have from the movies with Captain Marvel and actually translating it into the books before the movie actually comes out and before the movie actually does well, which I don't think is going to do very well at all, because in the stuff that you're looking at on Marvel.com for Meet the Skrulls, they're talking about revamping the look of the Skrulls. And you can already see that they're going to humanize them and make them into something that you actually identify with, because they're the main people in the actual book. And so you're going to identify with them. And I really think what is going on is they're revamping the look to make them look like they are going to look like in the movie, which is the Captain Marvel movie that comes out in a couple of months. And again, I am guessing at this, but I really think that in the movie, they're going to have the Skrulls and they're going to be more humanized. They're going to be portrayed as the villain at first, but then you're going to learn that they're not actually the villain. Whereas in the comics, they've always been the villain. Always. And this Meet the Skrulls, where they're humanizing them, they're actually preparing the audience for actually accepting the Skrulls as something other than what they've always been portrayed in the comics. And it's not just the movies informing the material in the comics, it's the movies informing the material in the comics before the movies even come out. That's the scary part. And that's what I think this new series of Meet the Skrulls is actually doing with Captain Marvel. And again, at any point when you have one genre trying to overlay itself onto another, you get one of those genres being smothered, and it's usually the smaller one. And this is what's happening to comics right now. Comics is not allowed to shine. Those actual elements of art and storytelling and how a storyteller can actually take the ball and run with it, those things seem to be gone because the movies are smothering the ability of those creators to actually do any of those things in a unique way. And not just doing it because they have a moneymaker on the movies, but now, I would say, with this Meet the Skrulls and Captain Marvel, doing it before they even have an audience, before they even know what is actually going to do well or not. Which, again, is just going to speed up the demise of comics, in my opinion. So, tell me what you think about this. Tell me where else you have seen this in the comics, both in Marvel and DC. And if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Like I said, tell me where you have seen this, and give me something new to think about. All right, I'll see you later. Bye.